Yeah, this is working. That's because it's not plugged in. This was working now.
I am definitely better. I'm not 100%, but I'm better. Yes, I'm gonna try singing today full out for the first time. We'll see. Not well.
Reminds me of high school now.
Hey, how are you? I thought I recognized that voice. How you doing? No. Hello. Oh, thank you so much. You know, someplace I can get like some hot tea or something. If not, it's no big
Let
deal.
me see if I can get something for you.
Thank you.
She's coming in right now. Susie's coming in.
Okay for me to start, Susie? Okay, good morning, everyone. I would say I'm about 60% better. I still have the cough, but I can do a lot more. All right. So what I want to do this morning is a little bit more history to take us into the medieval period, because that's when really everything explodes. We definitely have lots of Jews living outside the land of what is now Israel by the time of the Second Temple and right afterwards. But those communities are kind of sort of stable until we get more towards the movement into the medieval period, which we'll talk about next week. Okay, so let's do a little bit of history today and a little bit of diaspora communities. So, just to give us a sense one more time of where we are, this is King David in around 600, 586. Come on, Mark. 586. This is the destruction of Solomon's temple by the Babylonians. Around 300 is Alexander the Great. Around 165 are the Maccabees and the rise of the Pharisees, whom we are going to speak about today. In 30, we get the death of Jesus. That's going to be informative for part of our discussion today. And in 70, we have the destruction of the Second Temple by the Romans. Okay. So what's really important in terms of this section in here is what we call the Second Temple period of Judaism. And so what happens is the Jews are sent into exile in 586. They're allowed to return when? Approximately 540-ish under Cyrus the Great of Persia. So, starting right here, the Jews get to go back to Judea. Judah. It'll be called Judea in a little bit. Don't worry, I'm not contagious. They get to return. And as we know from our history, some do, most don't. Some do return to Judah, most don't. And they don't because they've already been in Babylonia for 40 years, right? Their girls are in ballet class, the boys are playing Little League, you know. They already have their lives there. Life is good. Remember in Babylon, we have the hanging gardens of Babylon. We have the Tigris and Euphrates River, so it's very fertile. Babylon was a really nice place to live and was a big metropolitan city. It was great. What was in Judah for them to return to? Sand. It was sand. Their temple was destroyed. The city, Jerusalem, was destroyed. I mean, it was just sand and hot, and there was nothing for them to go back to. So some went back, the diehards, and the remnant of the monarchy went back under Zerubbabel, and they go back because Cyrus has told them, you recall this from one of the last week or the week before, Cyrus has told them, look, go back, build your temple, just pay me my taxes and I'm good. I don't care who you worship, I don't care what you do on Shabbat, whatever. Pay me my taxes when I want my money, and everything's good. And the Jews were great with that. So, some went back and they rebuilt a temple. It wasn't anything, oh, thank you so much. Thank you. It was not anything special. They didn't have a lot of money, right? Solomon's temple, we are told, was beautiful. All kinds of special wood and gold and all kinds of beautiful things. These people, they went back and they didn't have money. There was no populace to tax. So they built something, and it was there. We know it wasn't great because we have a couple of statements that say the old timers who were around when Solomon's temple was there cried when they saw the new one. Not cried out of joy, cried out of sort of despair that really this is what we have now when we used to have that. All right, so they build this temple. This exists all the way until Herod. Herod comes in, and the first thing he does is remodel the temple. Now, the structure that you see in the gift shops, that's Herod's temple. That's the second temple. It's the remodeling of the second temple. So Herod did like a great shul makeover kind of thing, and he built this gorgeous, gorgeous, gorgeous temple. And that stands all the way until 70, when the Romans destroy it. So for this entire period, 540 to 70, so this is 540 years plus another 70 years, 610 exactly, right around 610 years, we have a second temple. And that's called the Second Temple period of Judaism. Why is that so important? It's so important because during this Second Temple period of Judaism, there are many ways to be Jewish. So, for instance, in our world today, you have any number of ways to be Jewish. You can be Orthodox, you can be Reform, you can be conservative, you can be renewal, you can be Reconstructionist. I mean, there's say again? Sephardic. There are any number of Jewish expressions, and all of us are considered normative Jews, meaning that everybody accepts us as Jews. Some of the more traditional elements in Jewish society look down on some of the less traditional elements of Jewish society, but basically everybody recognizes everybody as Jews. And we talked last week about the Samaritans and the Karaites, who are not considered normative Jews by the Jewish community at large. Yes? Good. So the question from Gary is, what about secular Jews who don't attend a synagogue, who aren't religious? Are they normative Jews? And the answer to that is absolutely yes. The particular question of secular Jews opens up like the biggest Pandora's box that can be opened in our tradition. Because when we ask the question, who is a Jew? What does it depend on? Well, the absolute fundamental thing it depends on is if your mom's Jewish, according to rabbinic law. Is your mom Jewish? If she is, then you are Jewish, period. I have a number of people, over the course of dealings with people who say, well, I'm half Jewish. And it's like, well, what does that mean? Well, my father was Jewish. It's like, well, I need to tell you, there's no such thing as half Jewish. If your mom is Jewish, you're Jewish under rabbinic law. In the Reform movement, if your father, patrilineal descent, if your father was Jewish and you were raised Jewish, and you didn't really know anything else, that will sometimes qualify you in the Reform movement, but it won't qualify you anywhere else. Okay. So, yes. Yeah. I mean, your mom has to be Jewish, or you must have converted into the faith. If you convert into the faith in a formal conversion, then you're just as Jewish as everybody else. And in fact, our tradition says you should be even more honored, because you took the time, you studied, you made the effort. And as we all know, Jews who have converted actually know more than, than most Jews because they studied. And also, we should point out, you know, it is a function also of how all of us were raised as Jews. For many of us, early on, women were not allowed to study, so it's not their fault that many women don't know. They weren't allowed to. And you know, what we were taught in Hebrew school was children's stuff. We never learned the big stuff. So I applaud all of you for being here and learning about our tradition. Okay, so we have this period, and what defines this period is the ability to express your Judaism in different ways. And what I mean by that is, Josephus tells us that at this time there are 4 sects, S-E-C-T-S, of Judaism. You could belong to the Pharisees, you could belong to the Sadducees, you could belong to the Essenes, and you could belong to the Zealots. And I will go further and add a little bit there and say you could also be a Nazarene. And we're going to talk about the Nazarenes in a moment. These are Jews for Jesus. And they definitely considered themselves Jews. And their status was very iffy for a long time. So let's start out here. First, we have the Pharisees, who begin to become dominant in society. They were the largest of the 4 groups, around 165. And they are basically the lawyers of their time. They institute all the legal opinions. They are the judges. And spiritually, in terms of our tradition, they believe in an afterlife. Then we also have the group called the Sadducees. And the Sadducees are named they're called Tzadokim in Hebrew. They are named after the high priest Tzadok. Does anyone know who Tzadok was? Pretty close. Solomon's. Yes, very good. So partway through early in Solomon's reign, at the end of David's reign, when Solomon is trying to get the throne, and really the crown prince is David's son Adoniah. So the former high priest, Abiathar, supports Adoniah. When Solomon takes the throne, he says, look, you supported Adoniah, sorry, you're out. And he replaces Adoniah with Tzadok. And Tzadok becomes the high priest, all from the house of Aaron, clearly. Why that's important is because from that moment on in Jewish history, in order to be considered a legitimate high priest, you had to come from the line of Tzadok. In other words, you had to be what we call a Zadokite priest. And remember once again that all Levites are priests, and all priests are Levites. But only some priests and some Levites are Kohanim. So they're a subsect of priests. Okay. So the Sadducees their name comes from the high priest Tzadok. We know very, very, very little about them. Josephus gives us a couple of tiny little sentences. That's it. So we don't really know. But what we think we really know is that the The Sadducees were the sort of wealthy aristocratic class. They were, by the time of the Maccabees, they were the most Hellenized of the Jews. They adopted Greek ways much more so than the lower classes. They seem to have owned a fair amount of land, so they were wealthy. They did not believe in an afterlife, so they conflicted with the Pharisees. Because they did not believe in an afterlife, the Pharisees did believe in an afterlife. And everybody was vying for control. Yes? Very nice. Okay, so the question is this in Babylon or Judea? And the answer is, it is in Palestine. Palestine, Judah, it's hard to know what to call the area. What is now the southern portion is the Holy Land, yeah. Okay. So those are the Sadducees. So we have Pharisees and Sadducees. Pharisees are the largest group. Sadducees are a smaller, kind of wealthy, aristocratic group, obviously looking out for their interests. If the academic hypotheses are correct, then it was probably members of the Sadducees who wrote the book of Leviticus, right? Because what does Leviticus do? It outlines the importance of the priests. Who would write such a book? The priests, right? They want to talk about how important they are and what the rules are. Good question. So Joette asked, well, how is it that they had land when the priests didn't have land? Accordingly, as we know, when the Levites go into the land of Canaan in ancient times, even before all this, they are not apportioned a land, which is why the tribe of Levi does not have any special place. They don't get land. As their function is taking care of the temple, Mishkan, whatever structure, depending on what time in history we are. As we move through history, priests get to own stuff. And as well, there were other members of the Sadducees who weren't necessarily priests. So the Sadducees were comprised of priests, we think, as well as other wealthy Israelites at that time. And it does seem that some of the priests could own land, but remember, we don't know for sure a lot about them. These are sort of, well, it stands to reason if this, and this are true, then this is probably true as well. The third group that we have at this time are called the Essenes. And the Essenes are a monastic group in the 1st century, a little bit later, who move out into the Judean desert. And they are a monastic sect. Pliny and Philo tell us that they are almost all men. They are very concerned about ritual purity, so you have many mikvaot, many mikvahs, all over their settlements. They leave mostly Jerusalem, especially during the Hasmonean times. Right in here. They leave because the Hasmonean rulers are, number one, following a lunar calendar, which we do, but the Essenes were following a solar calendar. And so they said, look, you guys are celebrating everything on the wrong days. We can't be with you. That's not okay. God said to celebrate it on this day, and you're using this calendar, so you're off. Not working for us. Secondly, they looked at the Hasmonean rulers as completely illegitimate. Remember, as I just told you, every high priest had to come from the line of Tzadok. Every king had to come from the line of David. You had to be related to David in order to be a king of Israel, which is why Jesus' claim to come from David is so very problematic for Jews. It's impossible. You can't get Jesus from David. But the Christians work very, 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 very hard, and I'm not going to denigrate their tradition at all, but they work very hard to get Jesus from David. But it really doesn't work. You know, in the obvious way, we can say, who according to Christianity is Jesus' father? God, right? Well, how does one get one's Jewishness in the ancient world? From one's father. It doesn't come from the mother until a little bit later, during the Roman times, but after Jesus, when it was determined, the Roman soldiers would go in and rape, pillage, and plunder everybody. So there were lots of Jewish women who became pregnant from rape. But they had no idea who the father was. They were raped by some Roman soldier, and he's gone. And so the rabbis necessarily had to change the lineage and say, look, it comes from the mother, because you always know who your mother is, but you often, sometimes, never know who your father is, especially at this time. Okay, but at this time, it's determined through the father, because your tribal affiliation now, we talked about this, I think, as well. If you're in Israel or a Kohen or a Levi, that comes from your father. Your father bestows upon you your tribal affiliation. Most Kohanim, it's been passed on. The father tells the son, we're Kohens. You can't do this, you can do this. And in the Orthodox tradition, it's still very strict. It's very strict. I have a congregant who is a Kohen, but he married a divorcee, which is absolutely verboten in Orthodox circles. Kohen cannot marry a divorcee. So he has never had an aliyah until last week when I gave him an aliyah. Because the Orthodox side of the family was, you're kind of dead to us. Even though she's Israeli. Yep, she's definitely Jewish. Absolutely. So, the more traditional you are, the more significance this has. All right. And certainly you can be the daughter of a Kohen, a Bat Kohen. In more liberal circles, a Bat Kohen can sometimes get away with doing some things a Kohen can, but in general, it's just being a Bat Kohen. It doesn't confer to you anything. It's always the male, and your father determines that. Okay. So back to the Essenes. The Essenes are in the desert. They're all male. They are concerned with ritual purity, mikvah. They do believe in an afterlife. And they are reading texts that other normative Jews are generally not reading. As we talked about in the Apocrypha, the Book of Jubilees, the Book of Enoch. We know that because we found some fragments of these books in the Dead Sea Scrolls. And popular academic opinion has it that the Dead Sea Scrolls were authored by the Essenes. That's what we think we know. All right, the Essenes end up dying out as a group in the 1st century, mostly because as the Romans attack Jerusalem and destroy the temple, they have to go through the Essenes to get there. And so as they march through, the Essene settlements are destroyed. They might not. That's exactly true. They might not have lasted anyway because they didn't have women. I mean, the only other way they would have lasted is to have more men brought into the community, clearly. But as Joette says, it's a great example. Look, if you don't have the women, you're not going to last for very long. I think as a monastic group dedicated to ritual observances, I think they probably felt that the women would be distracting. I assume also that probably it wouldn't have been a particularly appealing lifestyle for a woman in that era, for sure. In modern times, medieval and modern times, clearly we have nuns who would make that sacrifice and do all the time and have done for many, many years. In the ancient world, I don't know. And it also may be that they only allowed other men. We know a fair amount about them, but we don't know a lot. We don't know everything. So the question is, they had to know if they didn't have women, they're going to die off. Except that if you have more and more men coming into the thing, you can keep it going. And so they were fleeing the Hasmonean rulers of Jerusalem because they didn't see the Hasmonean rulers as legitimate. They were not descended from King David, and the high priests were not descended from Tzadok, and they were following a lunar calendar. All these things, there were some Essenes in Jerusalem, we know that from Josephus, but most of them went into the desert. Okay, that's our third group. The fourth group that we have are called the Zealots. And the Zealots are the group that's opposing the Roman invasion of Jerusalem, all right in here. And you know this best from Masada. In 66 CE, the Zealots flee to Masada and create a stronghold there. By 73 CE, they're at their last stand, and General Flavius has built I'm sure you've all seen this or heard of it, have built the earthen ramp up to the top of Masada. The Romans get up to the top, they find everyone dead, except for a handful of people who report that they all committed suicide, according to Josephus. All right, so we have these four groups functioning during this very, very long period of time, mostly towards the latter part of it. As we move forward in time, we get to 130. And in 130 CE, we have a second rebellion by the Jews. And you know this best under the general Bar Kokhba. And Bar Kokhba leads a small group of Jews against the Emperor Hadrian, and who is ruling Rome. And that time was particularly brutal for Jews. It was because they were called the Hadrianic persecutions. Hadrian was very brutal to Jews. And Bar Kokhba leads a small band of Jews against the Roman army. We can imagine how that turns out. Bar Kokhba has some early little skirmish victories, right? He's only got a small group of Jewish soldiers, and they make life a pain in the tuchus for the Roman army. sort of, kind of like what the partisans did during World War II against the Nazis, right? The partisans had small groups in the forests, and they would disable a tank, or they would put a bomb under this, or they would, and they created some problems. Well, Hadrian finally said, okay, enough of this. And he sends the entire Roman legion against Bar Kokhba. And Bar Kokhba gets smashed really quickly. Why is that important for us? Because Rabbi Akiva thought Bar Kokhba was the Messiah. And remember, the way we think of Messiah today is not the way they thought of Messiah. For them, Messiah was not the spiritual redeemer from heaven who is going to restore peace on earth and make everything wonderful, or usher in the messianic times. That was not our ancient idea of Messiah. The ancient idea of Messiah was a warrior king who was going to come back and restore David's dynasty. It was a man who was going to be crowned king, and then we're going to have David's glorious kingdom once again for Jews. That was Messiah, Mashiach, the anointed one, right? So who is anointed in the ancient world? Kings and high priests. Good. They were the two people who were anointed. So Mashiach, the anointed one, would be a king. That's why they called him King of the Jews. Yes. Yep. 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 Oh. So Rosa said, the Christians believe that Jesus will come back as a king, a warrior king. And yes, so that's how, that's why he was called King of the Jews, and why Christianity works very hard to get his lineage back to David. If you look at the lineage as a Jew, we kind of go, I don't think so, not even close. But we allow Christians to have their interpretation of how it is, their belief, and look, Christianity is a beautiful religion. It's a beautiful religion. It teaches love, caring, compassion, tenderness. It's beautiful. Yes, it had some very difficult times against Jews in our history. During the Crusades and during the Middle Ages, we were persecuted terribly, terribly by Christians. And that was not okay. But also remember, before we get too all high and mighty here, what does God tell Joshua to do? God tells Joshua to go into the land and wipe out the Canaanites, slaughter every single one of them. If that happened, if it's true, then we did some really bad stuff too in the name of God. So we shouldn't get high and mighty, but Christianity teaches, the teachings are quite beautiful. We will all never agree on the role of Jesus in history and some other theological tenets, but by and large, we agree with them on a lot of things. Okay, I have, before COVID started, I have a weekly breakfast with 3 Protestant ministers and 1 Anglican priest, and we had wonderful breakfast because we all agreed early on. I said, look, guys, I'm never going to agree with you about Jesus. It's not going to happen. No way, no how. And they're all, yeah, we're going to get you over to our side. I said, not a chance, not a chance. But they were also very curious about Jewish tradition. And so they loved when I would tell them, oh, this isn't exactly right, this isn't exact. You say, thou shalt not kill. It's not thou shalt not kill, it's thou shalt not murder. Because killing and murder are different. Oh, we didn't know that. You know, these kinds of important things. Okay. So, in 132, Bar Kokhba's rebellion is crushed. So we have now two instances. We have Masada, the zealots of Masada, who are crushed, and we have the Bar Kokhba, the second set of zealots who are crushed. And by the time of the Hadrianic persecutions, Hadrian has destroyed Jerusalem and renamed it Aela Capitolina. It is now a Roman pagan city. No Jews are allowed except once a year on Tisha B'Av. So there are no more Jews in Jerusalem, as I said, except for once a year. And the city is a pagan city. Everything, all the religious areas have been completely desecrated and defiled. And Aelia Capitolina comes from Hadrian's first name in Latin, which is Aelius, and Capitolina, which is Jupiter, the god Jupiter's second name in Latin. So it is Hadrian put together with the god Jupiter. By 135 CE, at this time, there are about 7,000 Jews in Rome. Philo says there are 1 million Jews in Egypt at that time, but there are a number of scholars who disagree with that. And they say, we have no idea where Philo's getting his numbers from. And there are approximately 7 million Jews in the entire Roman world. That's a lot. Yes, it is, absolutely. Where were the Jews? Well, as we talked about last week, they are in settlements in the Mediterranean and northern Africa. They're on Crete, they're on Cyprus, they're in North Africa, and the Greeks and the Romans fight a war in 130 called the Kitos War, and many Jews are taken away as slaves, and many Jews choose to leave as well because of the war. This also happens a little bit earlier in the destruction of the Second Temple. When the Romans come in and they destroy the Second Temple, they haul off Jews as slaves. As Joette pointed out the other week, I tried to copy a thing for you of the Arch of Titus. That's why Zoom sometimes is a real help to us. But the Arch of Titus depicts the Jews being taken. It's an arch in Rome, and on the top of the arch, there's a frieze, a relief that shows the Jewish slaves being led by the Roman soldiers, and they're carrying a huge menorah. And so we know that many Jews were taken into slavery at this time. Yes.
What happened to those Jews as they became slaves? Did they retain their Judaism, or did they become Christians?
So what happened to those Jews who were taken in as slaves? Good question, because it isn't, so remember that it isn't until 300 when Constantine himself converts to Christianity, and then his successor, Theodosius I, converts the entire Roman Empire to Christianity. So at the time that these slaves are taken in, they are Jewish slaves being taken into a pagan Rome. So the question is, what can they do? And I think the answer is they can't do much. They can't do much. Roman society would not have allowed them to just, go off and practice your religion, that's okay. First of all, they were slaves. I expect they probably tried to hold on to whatever they could, but I'm sure they were not able to practice Judaism in any meaningful way. And remember, after the destruction of the Second Temple, there really is no way to be Jewish anymore. The way that you were Jewish during that Second Temple period and before was you brought a sacrifice to the priests. The priests would make the sacrifice on your behalf to God, and you hoped that God would like the sacrifice that you brought, and if he did, he would rain blessings down onto you and your family. That was Judaism. You brought a sacrifice, and you hoped God would like it. Incidentally, as an aside, the Catholic Mass is probably the closest thing we have today to what might have looked like what was going on in the temples way back when. But remember, when the temple is destroyed in 70 CE by the Romans, there's nothing left. That's it. Judaism's gone. There was a moment in history, right after the destruction of the Second Temple, when Judaism ceased to exist because there was no other format for it. And it isn't until the rabbis come in and rescue Judaism and create a new format for Judaism. So we all know prayer, study, and acts of kindness, right? Al shlosha devarim, al haTorah ve'al ha'avodah ve'al gemilut chasadim. Prayer, acts, and deeds of kindness replace the sacrifices, so that Judaism now becomes completely portable. It is not centered around the temple in Jerusalem. It's wherever you are, you can practice Judaism, because now it's just about prayer and study and being a good person. Yes? Good. So the answer, the question, the point is there were houses of study. Where were the houses of study? Say again? Babylonia, yes. There were houses of study in Babylonia that were sort of kind of taking the place of sacrifices in the temple. So that's how we think the Babylonian Jews were able to stay on the continuum of Jewish expression. But there is a moment in history.
So, Rabbi, what Lana said about Babylonians, there were still Jews in Babylonia. Did the Rome conquer Babylonia?
No.
So there were still Jews there.
Absolutely. In fact, the Babylonian community was huge. I'm just about to get to that. Yes, good question. The Babylonian community was huge. So as we said, because of the loss in 70 and 135, lots of Jews were taken into slavery, and lots of Jews decided to leave on their own. By this time, 60% of the Jewish population lived outside of the land of what we call Israel. So the diasporan communities were enormous. Many Jews moved to Babylon because it was such a thriving community and it was so good to be there. And all of this was pretty much a very gradual process. Jews slowly moved out into varying communities. All right, I want to finish up today with the last of our sects. And these are called the Nazarenes. These are the Jews who are following Jesus. All right. They considered themselves Jews. Absolutely, they considered themselves Jews. The Jewish establishment was very, 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 and the more that the later into history that we get, the more away the Jewish establishment wanted them. We know that because remember that in our Amidah, in the Shemona Esrei, the 18 benedictions, there are really 19 benedictions. One was added later on by the rabbis. It's called the Birkat Haminim, and it's the blessing against the heretics. And who were the heretics? The Notzrim. The Notzrim were the Jews who were following Jesus because they were practicing a heretical form of Judaism. So the Nazarene communities branched out. They were in Pella in northern Greece. They were in Perea on the east side of the Jordan River in what is now Jordan. They were in Aleppo in Syria. They were in Beroea in northern Greece. And they were in a place called Basanitis in modern-day Syria. These were pretty large communities. There were evidently enough Nazarenes in the ancient world that the rabbis felt threatened by them. Joette. This is right before and during the time of Paul. So, does anybody know when Paul is executed? A little earlier, 60. But very, very close, very close. He's executed around 60. Jesus dies around 30. So from 30 to 60, we have communities that are trying to figure it out. And these communities, they don't know what to do. If you're a Jewish Christian, and the lines are not clear. If you're a Jewish Christian, what do you believe in? What do you do? What did the Nazarenes believe in? They believed that Jesus was the Messiah. They believed in the virgin birth. But they also believed that circumcision was required. They believed in both the Hebrew scriptures and the Christian scriptures, the Gospels. And they read their sources both in Hebrew and Aramaic. So the Gospels were written sometime between like 60 and 100.
So the Gospels were written after Paul.
After Paul.
So this group that is following the Gospels is after Paul.
Correct.
But I thought that Paul came and said, in order to be Jewish, you don't have to be circumcised.
That is correct. Good. You just what do you call it? Perfect segue into my next point. Okay, so these communities were trying to figure it out. What do we do? And Paul was the person they went to, leader of the Nazarene movement in general. What do we do here? So Paul ultimately says, you don't need to circumcise. Then he said, look, you don't need to keep kashrut. You don't need to observe Shabbat. And these communities are like, okay, all right, then we have permission not to do that, okay. I'm sure the circumcision one went over very well. But then in the end, Paul says, look, you don't have to do anything. All you have to do is have faith in Jesus as the Messiah, and you can get rid of Mosaic law. And it's at this time when these Jewish Christian communities had a little bit of a crisis. Because the Jews, who were really more Jewish than Christian, said, oh, no, we can't go that far. That's too much. And they left. Then the Jewish Christians, who were a little more Christian than Jewish, said, okay, we're good with that. And so these communities kind of split into two along the lines of, are we going to go for Mosaic law and be Jewish, or are we going to be Christian?
So you say the Jews of Nazareth had nothing to do with the temple? Because it was still around at that time.
Say that again?
The temple was destroyed in 70, so obviously the Christians were, if you want to call them Christians, were around. Did they have any contact, or did Jesus have any contact with the temple?
Oh, sure. Oh, sure, sure.
So they were Jewish in that sense.
Yes, absolutely. Because we know that Jesus overturns the money changer tables on Shabbat, right? Because he's upset with what they're doing. The final point I'll make today, because I know you have to get to your break, is that at this time, these Nazarene communities go through a big change, and what happens is the movement becomes entirely Gentile, entirely Christian. So you have Jews, you have Nazarenes who are in between, and then you have Gentiles. The purely Christian movement explodes. Something for us to remember, if you were Jewish in the ancient world, you were a member of a very large group of people. It's not like us today who are like 1% of 1% of 1% of the population. If you were Jewish in the ancient world, you were like members of a large group. And so you had Jews, you had Christians, and then you had these little communities who were trying to figure it out. Ultimately, what happens is Christianity explodes, Judaism does what it does, and these communities sort of fade away. Yes, Lana.
Okay, 10% of the the Roman Empire was either Jewish or monotheists. They were
Okay.
fellow travelers. So when Paul comes along and erases all these requirements, those fellow travelers that don't want to do circumcision, don't want to keep kosher, but they believe in God, are good, become Christians.
Yes.
And that changes the whole dynamic. Then it's also year 70, you have the split between, the destruction of the Second Temple and being Jewish. Well, the Christians are saying, well, we're not like them. We're not the uprisers. We're different. And so that causes a further split in the relationship between Jews and Christians.
Very good. Thank you. Very good. Yes.
Yeah, the other thing I want to say is that Paul was a real market person, because he wrote letters to all these communities, and those became part of not dogma, but part of the New Testament.
the
They call
Christian
it the New
lexicon,
Testament,
yeah.
Which,
Absolutely.
the epistles. And,
Yes.
And from what I understand, maybe the epistles came before the Gospels in time, because Paul wrote them between 30 and 60, and then the Gospels were written later. I think. That's what I'm hearing from you.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And remember again, what we think we know is different from what we can say absolutely. So we think the Gospels were written at that time. That's our best guess, our best estimation, our, looking from an academic point. Yes?
He didn't have a council to work with. He just arbitrarily made these decisions.
So it seems like Paul didn't have a group to work with. He just made the decision. By and large, he made these decisions,
On
yes.
his own,
He was the representative in charge.
which makes me feel like when he made these decisions, they're much easier.
Of course.
Yeah, so of course, yeah, that's the point. So why be Jewish?
Of course.
And you could still believe in God, and you don't have to do all these other things.
Correct. Yes, it did make it much easier. Yes. Observing Shabbat is not easy. If you choose to keep kosher in your life, it's not easy. All these things. No, it's not easy to be a traditional Jew is not easy. To be a member of the more liberal Jewish community, much easier. Okay, everybody, have a wonderful week.
Rabbi.
We'll move into medieval Judaism, and then we can begin to really talk about various communities around the world But in order to get there, we had to understand what happened right before it, and now we know. And so we're off to the races in medieval times next week. All right, have a
Right.
great week, everyone.
Break, okay, break time. Oh, just to let you know that I had requested that coffee and goodies be brought in earlier so that maybe you can have coffee during the first session. Huh?
Do your own thing. Make your own rules.
So we'll have coffee earlier.
Even a daughter real, no
You
longer.
know, you can have it while Rabbi's talking.
Oh, it hasn't. Rabbi Billy walks, you know. We are now
I think that's how it has to be. We have to allow people to find out what works for them and their families, and be tolerant and compassionate. And, you know, some things are like over the line. It's like not okay. That's not going to happen. But within reason,
when Rabbi Roth was and this is, I'm just bad. It's not judgment. You understand it? The road off. I was in Palestine. We discussed whether if we had a bar on this area, we would even allow Israelis. Okay? Now, any music.
sure, and I think it has to be that way because so many other places will allow it. It's like that people will go somewhere else.
And that was what happened.
Yeah.
And, you know, now, it used to be people could not use their smartphone on Shabbos. Now, I mean, they're not supposed to. No one says anything.
Yeah, I don't think it's my job to. Same here. I mean, as you know, I turned us into independent. We're an independent synagogue.
I didn't know that.
I'm not affiliated with conservative Judaism. We're an independent synagogue, and I'm like, look, if you believe in the Jewish God, come in and pray with me. I don't really care what you call yourself. If you don't want, if you eat a cheeseburger on Shabbat, it's none of my business. I'm your rabbi. If you want me to tell you what Judaism says, traditional Judaism, I'll tell you. But otherwise, far be it from me to judge anybody for anything.
Except if it's definitely immoral.
Sure, of course. But if you want to come and pray, and I can find a way to help you feel closer to God, then I did my job.
I agree. You understand it all in modern day America.
his grandson called his mom, and then his mom was like, "You forgot Grandpa had oral surgery this morning," so it was okay. Yeah, that's. I just wanted to. I didn't. I mean, he's literally there every day. Good morning, Gary. How are you?
Beautiful program last night.
Oh, great.
I mean, it was really good.
Very good. Yeah.
Glad I was able to come, because I was thinking about not, we live up in Vermont Hills.
It's hard to get. Yeah. So it's worth the schlep. I think.
Hardly see the freeways.
Oh yeah. 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 It was foggy and yucky and all that. Yeah. Yeah.
And you brought your boys.
Yes. Two of them. One of them didn't make it, but two of them. Yeah.
Okay, well, you can't win them all.
Yeah. The kids were riveted. I think.
Huh?
I think the kids really all got a lot out of it.
Oh, they had to.
Yeah. Yeah. I think so too. Yeah. Oh, okay. Everything okay? Oh, that's great. Yeah. Well, we're glad. It's a good reason to miss it. Okay. Well, I hope they do.
Oh, it's too late?
I gotta check in with the boss and see if the boss is. Am I clearance? Should we start? Is this our group today or is this folks who?
We have two.
His email.
So I'm going to walk around with a mic, so please. You want to repeat the question? Okay.
Yeah, because that way I could.
Okay.
If the question's too difficult, I could change it.
Yeah, you're right. I hadn't thought of that. But
And if the comment goes on too long, I could, We were just joking that I was going to repeat all of the comments, so for the benefits of all of you who are on live stream. If I don't like the comment, I'll just change it. That's what we were saying. And so that's what we've conspired against all you who are participating virtually. Ha 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 ha. Everyone this morning, for those of you who are watching, should have received, I sent out an email last night with the text on it. I heard that email didn't work. All right, it worked for about 50% of you. It's like the election, 50% thought it was good. Okay, so it worked for some of you. Then I resent it this morning. And, okay, so between this tonight and this morning, working, not working, I hope everyone has the text. I printed out some copies as well.
Want me to pass them out?
We could be a little less formal. At that big table there. Wait, did I give away the? Hello. No, it's fine. So good afternoon, everyone, or good morning, or depending on what time zone you're in. So I wanted to continue on the theme. We're studying Talmudic Agadah. And Agadah, well, it's hard to define what Agadah is, but what is, the Talmud consists of Halacha plus Agadah. Halacha is Jewish law. Agadah, loosely, is everything else that is not legal. So those are narratives and sort of different teachings. That's called Agadah. So we are studying largely so far in this class, mostly because I have been reading this great book called Timeless Tales by Jeffrey Rubenstein, who's a professor of Talmud at NYU, and I'm taking his material. So I just want to be forthcoming about that. Not necessarily his interpretations, although I'm factoring in, but I'm letting the book sort of direct me where I'm going. And then again, I actually don't think I noted it this week. The discussion questions that I always provide are straight from his, he published a study sheet, a study packet that went along with his book from the Jewish Publication Society. And so I just included his questions. But my interpretations are influenced by him, but not necessarily limited to him. Okay? So we talked about it's actually, we're sort of like in the relationship department. That's where we are, right? A few weeks ago, we studied the relationship between a mother and a son as expressed through the story of a mother, and we talked about the sandwich generation, of a mother who was making demands on her son and whether or not the son lived up to those demands. And then it ended tragically with the mother passing away. And then last week, it got a little spicy when we talked about but also tragic, about a couple that the flame had been extinguished in their relationship, and how the wife went about trying to rekindle the light, and what happened there and what transpired there. And one theme that we sort of uncovered was the dearth of communication between the husband and the wife, and we wondered together as a group if the couple had been better at communicating, perhaps the situation could have been different. Playing off of that, we're in this week's story, which is from a different Masechet, a different tractate of the Talmud, but also this is miscommunication. This is a story about miscommunication. And there's different ways to read this story, and so I'm curious how you read it. I'm going to try and read it without reading into it. So I'm just going to first try and unpack the story and not play my hands on how I read it. And the way I read it initially, I had never seen this text before, but the way I had read it initially was not the way that Rubenstein, the book that I was telling you about, the way that he read it, although he sort of acknowledges the way I read it later on. So there's a few different ways you can read this. I'm curious, maybe you'll come up with something else. So we're going to go through it. I'll try and explain it because I don't know if it's readily understandable. The first thing that you have to know to get a lay of the land is that back in those days, what language did they speak in, what language did the Middle Eastern Jewish communities speak? Aramaic. Good. Now, Aramaic, even more pronounced than the difference between English here and English in the United Kingdom. You ever, I find this with the Australians, right? I remember when I studied at Hebrew University in Jerusalem and became friendly. We went out for beers with a bunch of Australians. I turned to one of my friends. They said, they seem like nice, but I don't understand the damn thing that they're saying. you know? And so you've had that experience, Gary. So they speak English, we speak English, but it's a little bit different, and a lot different maybe. So I mention that because it seems that there's a communication, there's a linguistic difference in Aramaic as well. Remember, the Jewish community, especially when the forging of the rabbis in the early, second, third, fourth century, this is a little earlier, that there's different dialects of Aramaic. So there is Babylonian Aramaic, and there is Yerushalmi Aramaic, and they are different. And so you're reading now a story, so you need to know that it's like me sitting and having beer with the Australians, but there are differences between the way these folks communicate to one another. Okay. I'm on the first page. This is from Tractate Nedarim 66b. The Gemara cites another incident. There was a certain Babylonian who went up to Eretz Yisrael and married a woman there. So you know there's already, what did I just talk about language differences? Right. So you have a couple now. There's definitely a element of, there's definitely room for miscommunication here. They speak different languages or different dialects of Aramaic. Okay. He said to her, cook 2 lentils, which in his dialect of Babylonian Aramaic means like, oh, can you make me some lentils? But literally he said 2. Well, I don't think he was thinking so generously, Ernie. You're a mensch. You're like a nice guy. I'm not so sure he was. But, well, actually, that's the question I want to ask you. Think about how would you describe each of these folks in the story, particularly the woman. I think it's interesting. The whole story changes on how you read the woman. Okay, so here we go. So he said to her, cook 2 lentils. She cooked exactly 2 lentils. Right, 2 little lentils. Right, exactly. All right, so how? He grew angry with her. On the following day, he said to her, cook a gariva for me, which is cook me a whole mess of lentils. Right? Cook me a bunch of, I'm famished. I'm as hungry as a horse. If my Australian friend heard me say hungry as a horse, they'd say, oh, those Yankees, they speak a little oddly. So I'm really hungry. A gariva, by the way, I looked it up, is like a field's worth. A field. So guess what happened? Everyone, if everyone could just use this as turn your phones down. So cook a gariva for me. Meaning he wanted I'm really hungry because lady, I only had 2 lentils last night. Cook me a gariva of lentils. She cooked an actual seah for him. Like she cooked a whole mess of lentils. Like she took him literally. He said to her, go and bring me 2, and let me go into the Aramaic here. Hold on. Butsine, which he means as gourds. Like, cook me 2 squashes or pumpkins. She went and brought him 2 lamps because gourds, the same word, butsine, means light in Jerusalem dialect of Aramaic. So he says, bring me 2 gourds, and she brings him 2 lights. In anger, that's reading into it, he said to her, "Go and break them on the head of the Bava." Bava in Aramaic means gate. That's why, like, for those of you who've studied Talmud before, there's Baba Kama, Baba Metzia, and Baba Batra, the first gate, the middle gate, and the last gate. Baba means gate. So he says to her, "Go break these on the head of the gate," which is the gate of the city, a communal space. Bava Ben Buta, that's the just flipped over to, is a man. He was sitting as the judge at the gate. So you have a guy named Bava sitting at the Bava. So what does she do? She takes these lamps, breaks them on his head. Because his name was Bava. He said, take the 2 lamps and break them on the head of the Bava. So that's what she did. He, meaning Bava Ben Buta, said to her, "What is it that you have done?" She said to him, "This is what my husband commanded me to do." He said, "You fulfilled your husband's desire. May God bring forth from you 2 sons like Bava Ben Buta." And the story ends. Let's break this down. So, what I want to do is, let's do this a little bit differently. Let's try. I want someone to imagine, there's 3 figures in this story. There's the husband, the Babylonian husband who moves to Israel, gives his wife directions for dinner. First says, "Give me some lentils." She makes him 2 lentils. "Give me a whole mess of lentils, like don't hold back." She cooks him a field's worth of lentils. And then he finally is like, "All right, just make me 2 gourds, just cook a little squash for dinner." And she brings him 2 lights, and then he's angry, and he says, "Break them on the head, break them on the gate." And she breaks him over the Talmudic scholar's head. And then the Talmudic scholar, the 3rd character, then asks her about it and says, "Why do you break a lamp over my head?" And she said, "Because my husband commanded me to." And he said, "You listen to your husband. May God bless you with 2 children, 2 sons." It's like, hitting the lottery. It's like hitting and then the story ends. Okay, let's pretend first to be the husband. Imagine you are the husband. Sit with the husband. What is your impression of what's going on? Add some emotion in your interpretation to this story. You're the husband. I just did this because Susie was talking to me about writing stories from different perspectives, and Jill, our rabbinic intern, was recommending that I read something by Faulkner, which is famous, obviously, from different perspectives, telling the same story from different perspectives. So I think we're going to do the same thing here today. I just thought, why not? Because, I've only had my 4th cup of coffee today. So let's look at the story from different perspectives. Does someone want to offer their perspective? Before you offer your perspective, speak into the mic. No. Okay. So the question is, okay, good. You know what? How about this? We'll do this first. Thank you, Susie. Susie, I just listened to Susie. It just makes my life a lot easier. Before we pretend, like we're going to do some role playing, character playing, you can yell at it. No one breaks any lamps over anyone's head. I don't think our insurance will cover that. But we're going to play. But first, before we play, let's have clarifications. So Susie asked a question, clarification question. So not what you think, but clarify what's going on. So if you have a question of clarification, ask it. If you have an opinion, check it. Okay. Hold on to the opinions for a second. Susie said, how did they court? The answer to that is probably not much.
Well, maybe
So
the
it could be arranged. They may have met. They may not have met. But it's not clear. But it seems actually, Susie, from what you're saying, that that not a lot of time passes. Like he moves and he gets married. Otherwise, the Talmud would have said, like, the Gemara is economical with its words, but this is like it doesn't even, it goes, he moved to the land and got married to a certain woman. It doesn't say sometime passed, later on, a bit afterwards. There's not even a vav. So you're led to believe that there's not much of a relationship here. Okay, clarification questions.
No, I just have a comment.
All right, so hold the comments, clarification questions. So that's probably more of a comment than a clarification. We're going to get to, all right, so I'm going to open it. Susie, can I open it up to their comments first? But I want to play like who you are, like the figure first. So like, okay, so go ahead. You're the,
Okay,
wait, you had a clarification question. Go ahead.
What is the tractate Nedarim about?
Oh, thank you. That's a good clarification. So Nedarim is a tractate that deals with vows, So, like and it's essentially the rabbis don't like folks who kind of run at the mouth, and there's legal significance. The immediate context to this is a series of sugiyot of text about like kind of like relationships and that kind of stuff. Like, it feels like locker room talk because it's all men who wrote this. So it's like a bunch of guys, a bunch of fellas sitting in the locker room after racquetball on a Sunday afternoon at the J, and they're shooting off. That's what this feels like. They're like schmoozing. They're like, yeah. Oh no. Oh yeah, not in Chicago. Yeah, but not that. They're just they're like they're like having boy talk in the locker room. Okay, my wife, your wife. It's okay. All right, so now comments. Go ahead.
Okay, I'm going to start. I think he was somewhat disrespectful, and that the first time in using whatever comments he made about two lentils, when he found out she actually took it verbatim, that he should have clarified the second one. So it's a communication issue here and one of respect. And she was obedient, and I think that's the lesson. The wife is obedient to the husband, but he should have clarified a lot better than he did. He didn't clarify at all.
All right, so it's the husband. Hey, so Rosie, how about this? I'm going to stop your comments because I want to do it my way. So I get to do this way. Okay? So there we go. Here we go. Be the husband. So make a comment now, offer your opinion, your perspective. You are the husband. What are you thinking? Okay, go. Someone raise their hand. Be the husband. Who's the husband? Go ahead, Ernie. Give it to him. Start, like holler a little bit, Ernie. Get good. You men from Chicago don't put up with this. Come on.
Well, I tell my wife what to do and she doesn't do it properly. I mean, what do we think about our wives?
Right, okay, yeah. I mean, extrapolate. Boy, Ernie's like, yes, I told her what to do and she didn't do it properly. Oy vey, like, what's going on here? I have a little right to be angry. Good. Someone else, either to embellish that or we're still the husband. Don't respond if you're the wife yet. We're going to get to her. You are the husband. You may see it differently. And women can be the husband too, by the way. Women could be the husband too. Anyone, go ahead, Joette, you're the husband. What is he thinking?
My wife does not understand me, and I don't like that.
My wife doesn't understand me, and I don't like that. I'm talking to the wall. Or, wait, do you mean I'm talking to the wall, or like we need like a translator? We need like Google Translate. A little bit of both. In other words, does the man... And Ernie, this is my question for you also. Is the man does the man, you're the husband, is she being cheeky with you? Or are you like just having misunderstandings? What do you think, Ernie?
A complete misunderstanding.
Complete misunderstanding. The best of intentions, but boy, she should have taken Babylonian Aramaic classes at MID. She would have been a lot better off. She should have, okay, good. All right. But Joette's reading it a little bit differently. Husband Joette says, well, I'm thinking that there's a misunderstanding. There's clearly a language barrier, but there seems to be a little bit more than that. Okay. Anyone else who's the husband? What are you thinking? Any husbands out there? Go ahead. Yeah. Let's you gotta maybe it's just because I've had too much caffeine. Like, be a mad husband. Come on.
What is wrong with this woman?
What's wrong with this woman? Go ahead.
I tell her to make me lentils, and she makes enough for a mouse.
Right.
Doesn't she understand when you make a meal, it's more than 2 little beans?
Right. Don't they teach anything in these Israeli, Yerushalmi school of like home economics? Like, come on, what's going on? But is she being cheeky, or is she cheeky? Is she an idiot? Is she? I married not the sharpest tool in the shed. My wife's a little. She's got a nice smile, but the light upstairs is a little dim. All right, go. Anyone else want to be the husband? The husband. We have more husbands. Come on, lay into her,
Okay.
Or not, or be.
He gave her an order. It didn't quite come out the way he wanted. Instead of, he's thinking, what can I do to repair this? Because he knows it didn't work. She was taking me too literally. So he makes a self-correction, goes too far the other way. So I think he was rather trying to accommodate her.
Okay, so let's read him. I'm trying to, like the first night, I just moved here from Babylon. I made Aliyah. There's no Ulpan. I don't, this lady, and I'm trying here. So she cooked me 2 lentils. That's taking light, as my dad used to say to me. I don't know if he's watching. He used to say to me when we used to go to we'd say, Brian, we can go to a fancy restaurant, but you can just order the timber float. Do you know what a timber float is? A glass of water and a toothpick. So, right? So he said, what does she think? This timber, what am I, 2 lentils? Come on. And so, okay, I'm a tzaddik. I'm from Babylonia. I'm trying to make my life in Eretz Israel. I'm going to make this work. So I'm going to tell her, make a whole field's worth. But then she she should have known, I went one way. So finally, I'm getting a little annoyed here. But I just say, bring me some pumpkins, and she brings out a light, and then she cracks it over some guy's skull. Oy vey. Okay. Any more husbands? Any more husbands? It's interesting, the only emotion that's shared is his emotion. Her emotion is not shared at all, which is very interesting. It tells us once that he was annoyed. We don't know how annoyed. We don't know, was his annoyance the result of miscommunication? It was Ernie. Ernie was like, no, it was misunderstanding. It's like all those, those people from Boston. They don't pronounce their letters the right way. It's just, things get misunderstood. Or it could be he's getting annoyed because he's hungry. He's hangry, which is hungry, angry. Hangry, right? So he's hungry, this poor guy, and he didn't even get any lamb chops. He's just eating all these vegetables. Okay. Now we're going to switch. Let's be the wife. What are you thinking? You're the wife. Okay, Jim, go ahead.
I listened and did exactly what my husband said, and I've been rewarded, according to the sage, with 2 healthy sons in the future.
Wow. I did exactly what I was told. Some of it was a little like odd, but I did exactly what I was told. Poor guy, I had to smack him over the head with 2 lamps. But I'm getting my reward. I was taught to be an obedient wife. I listened to exactly what I was told. No matter, these Babylonian guys are a little, a little bit Meshuggah, but okay, I did exactly what I was told, and now I'm going to reap the rewards. Laila Tov, everything is good in my life. Good. Bridget, go ahead.
Oh,
Okay, you're the wife.
Okay, well, I thought that was a little bit weird what he asked for, but I was afraid to come and question him, because if I would have questioned him, he would have gotten mad. So I just did what he said, even though it seemed a little odd.
It seemed a little odd. Our relationship is new. We didn't, it's not like we went to the prom together in high school. We never went to homecoming together. Our families never met. He's a new immigrant. He wanted to make a home, and I want to make him feel okay, so I did it. It was a little strange, but it's going to work out all right. That's enough. Okay, good. Joette.
so I did exactly what he said. Why did he get so angry?
Oy vey, I married a jerk. He says to me, but 2 lentils. I make 2 lentils. He says a field's worth of lentils. I used all my pots and pans from the registry from Bloomingdale's. I emptied out the whole cabinet. I cooked lentils from morning until evening, and he gets upset at me, and then he gives me the lamps, and thank God at least I'm going to get 2 boys out of the deal, because my husband's a bit of a hothead. Okay, good.
The wife adjusts on the second order, because instead of being super taking it literally, she didn't make him a whole field of lentils. She made something somewhat smaller, even though it was a lot. So I think she's trying to adjust to his wishes.
Would she crack the guy over the head?
No, I don't know about that. I didn't get that. I was giving her credit for this. The second
Okay,
step.
the second
That's right.
one. I think they were trying to say that she was being literal there, too. I don't see that as an adjustment.
I know. I think it is.
Okay.
I mean, she could have been making
All
it
right.
for the town.
Okay, good. So I'm moving off of my, okay. Anyone see the wife a little bit differently? You're all very, go ahead. And then,
Oh, Linda or Warren?
yeah, Warren, be careful what you say here.
Warren, do you want to be the? Go ahead.
Even in English, is this better? Even in English, we have the problem. Because I remember the very first time Melinda met my mother, I just said, she wants to make you lunch. And, you know what I want to say? Okay. She wants to make you lunch. We're just going to have we're going to just have a little chicken. That's all I said. And actually what she did, she made me and made Melinda each a Cornish chicken.
Right.
Well, that was a little chicken.
Very good.
And so you could even get that understanding. Now, I don't know if Melinda was really mad at me or
Yeah.
not. I don't know.
So
Anyway.
my father was from the Lower East Side, and he's a first generation immigrant. I mean, he was born here, but his parents were immigrants, and so Yiddish was spoken. His parents both died when he was very young, but he met my mom and went to introduce my mom to his grandmother. And my mom tells the story. My mom's like this, is the daughter of a German Jewish family, and even though Schuldenfrei, but anyway, they were like the German Jews, couldn't be American fast enough. And so she didn't speak any Yiddish. And so she just remembers my father being sent on errands when they went to visit, and she would stay with the grandmother, and the grandma would talk Yiddish at her, and she just smiled and nodded her head. She didn't understand the word the woman said, right? So, okay, so sometimes that happens. All right, who's the woman?
I-
Okay, that's fine. Yeah, bro. Okay, nice having you. All right, good. Thanks for being here. Go ahead, Melinda.
I was just going to say, after she made the tiered lentils, I would have asked him, how much is a Gevera? So that I don't make too much now, because last time I made too little.
Okay, good. So that's a
I would
question.
want to define
Right.
what he wants.
So, yeah, that's a good question. You guys are not playing my game anymore, so we're gonna get back up. But it's a good question. Like, for those of you who, those of you who read her as misunderstanding. Actually, Jim's reading. And I forgot someone else that was good. Like, look, I didn't realize anything was wrong. I just did what I was told, and it was a little weird to me, but we did it. Because if she thought that he was getting angry, why didn't she ask a clarifying question? Like, okay, what's going on here? So is there another way to read the woman?
I have a comment from Rochelle. She is passive-aggressive.
Ah, yes. She's being a little bit... It's interesting. I don't know how passive it is. I think she may just be getting aggressive, especially with the poor guy who got the lamps smacked outside his head. By the way, lamps those days were very small. Do you remember? So, and it wasn't glass. But like, did you ever do like Dig for a Day in Israel, like the archaeological? So the lamps are like these little, yeah, exactly. They're small, and they probably were. So it wasn't like she thought, but it's still, it's still there for a reason. So, but the comment was, yeah, being passive aggressive. Imagine this. This guy just shows up. No one asked me what I want. I'm marrying this guy who's all of a sudden barking orders at me. I have no idea what he's talking about. Oh, you want 2 lentils, buddy? I'll make you 2 lentils. Oh, you didn't like that? You want a field? Good, I'll make you a field. Oh, you want 2 lights? I'll give you 2 lights. Oh, bring them in and bring them to the town gate, which is like the town square. Now, they chose the gate intentionally. They could have done the town square, but then they would have lost the play on words. So the gate is also like a popular hangout spot. You're going to embarrass me by making me do something as idiotic as smashing lights on the town gate in front of the whole community? They were just at my chuppah last week. And now they're going to see me going out in the middle of the town at the town gate and smashing lights. They're going to think I'm a lunatic. So I'll just break them over some rabbi's head. By the way, if any of you are having domestic issues, I'd prefer if you not break earthenware on my head. Just make an appointment. We can talk.
You can wear a helmet, Rabbi.
You can wear a helmet, right. So the woman, passive-aggressive. Does anybody want to read the wife anymore differently?
I do. I think she was pretty angry. Yeah. And
Go ahead.
was being sassy and doing exactly what he said in order to embarrass him, because it would only show that she was following his line of barking out the orders, and that at the end he would take responsibility for what she did. It wasn't her fault. But she was trying to teach him a lesson in a way. Hey, talk to me. And so it's an issue of idiomatic expressions, really, not so much the language itself, but how we say things in a different way than those Australians or the South Africans. They have their own idiomatic expressions that we don't even understand.
Good.
And that's what it was.
Good. So it's interesting. Maybe she's trying to set the tone for their relationship. Maybe she's cheeky or she's downright sassy, but it's with purpose. It's like, okay, I just got this guy. They just married me off. This is my house. I'm gonna make this very clear of how we're gonna move forward. And so if he's gonna do this and just start barking orders at me, there were no flowers on Shabbat. There was no, cook 2 lentils. What do you think I am? Well, all right, let's start getting this. I'm gonna start getting this out of control before the train goes off the tracks. It's another way of looking at it. So it's so interesting, like the same text easily could be read the way Rosalie is reading it and the way Jim is reading it, and it changes the whole story. The way Jim is reading it is, in this society, the man is in charge. He gave her orders, she followed them, and then she got rewarded. The way Rosalie is reading it is, I'm going to show him. I'm really, we got to clear this up. It's very different readings. Okay, now we're going to move on. Anyone else want to play the
I
woman?
want to say one last thing.
Sure.
That the kitchen in the home is a woman's castle and her domain.
Yeah, it's interesting. Yeah, it's interesting that it is around food, right? Like that the story that they're telling is around food. But we're forgetting about someone. Did anyone else want to be the woman? Anyone have a different reading of the woman? By the way, it's clear it's made up, this story, because they're not named. Like it's a fun story. But what are they trying to say? It's interesting. Then it's really interesting because there's Bava Ben Buta, who's a real guy, who's actually known in Talmudic. So I looked him up. He's known in the Talmud as a peacekeeper. So he's sort of like, in the Midrash, Aaron, Moses' brother, is known as the guy who makes peace. So he's known as the peacekeeper. And there's even a story about him that he is an advisor to Herod the Great on building the second, schmaltzifying, refurbishing, adding on to the second temple. And he's known as a guy who creates peace. So my question for you is, what is he thinking? He's sitting at the gate, adjudicating Jewish law, and some woman comes and cracks him over the head with these lamps. And he just says, the text uses emotion with the other male. He got angry at her. There's no anger here. He seems to show forbearance, and he just says, what are you doing? She explains it to him, and he says, may you be blessed with 2 children just like me. What is going on with him? What is he thinking? And then I'll give you some thoughts that I had.
I think he thinks they're both jerks.
Could be. So he's like, this is a hot-headed couple. Sign them up for therapy. Who else wants to be the guy, the sage? Bava Ben Butra. Go ahead, Melinda.
I think maybe he's saying to her that your sons will be like you. They'll be at peace. They'll listen. They'll be obedient, as opposed to, saying something that may or may not make any sense to you. They're going to follow your footsteps and try to...
But he says, may your sons be like me.
Well, so he's a peacemaker, where her husband is not a peacemaker.
Okay.
He's getting angry.
Okay, good. So the kids are going to take after you.
Right.
Okay. I read it a little differently then. That's good. Anyone else? No?
No,
Yeah,
we'll
go ahead.
listen to you.
No. One more.
Who else? Oh, Bridget.
I don't think they're thinking. They're just reacting. So it's, speaking, that's the first thing that he thinks of. He doesn't think of what other alternatives there might be.
Oh, so I just got hit over the head, and he just is like, what? And then she says it, and he's like, okay, may you be blessed with children. Just let's get this lady out of here. Okay.
Gone.
Okay. I read this as different. First of all, and this is what Rubenstein notes, I never thought about this. 2 lights is intentional. Shabbat candles. I think there's some imagery here that she's taking 2 lights, and the woman who lights the Shabbat candles, and then she's cracking them. So I think that's just an interesting thing to consider. And I read it a little differently than Melinda. I don't remember if Rubenstein read it this way or not, but I read it a little different than Melinda. So I looked up Bava Ben Butra, and he's known as someone who has a lot of patience. And so when he says, Bava Ben Butra says to the wife, may you be blessed with 2 children, 2 sons, 1 for each lamp, I guess. May you be blessed with 2 sons just like me. I think he's saying, your kids are in for a rough ride. They're going to need to be very patient because mom and dad are not going to create a peaceful home. And so may you be blessed with 2 kids just like me, because they're going to need to be that, because this is going to be so contentious. Because throughout this whole thing, maybe he knows the whole story, no one asks any clarifying questions. They clearly don't understand each other, but they don't attempt to clarify. They don't attempt. He's the only one who who really asks a question. And he's the one who gets hit over the head. He's the one who could easily be the most angry, and he's not. They don't ask any clarifying questions of one another. So he says, maybe either, you can read it a different way, may you be blessed with 2 kids just like me. Kids are going to ask questions because you're not talking to one another, and the kids are going to have to understand what is going on in order to make a go of this life. The whole text, in its own confounding way, whether you read it like Jim or Rosalie or the way I'm reading it with 3 figures, I think the one common denominator is miscommunication. And it underscores, and that's why some of the discussion questions are interesting about like the pitfalls of miscommunication and how often, I tell this to the staff here, most of the time in the workplace, 98% of all disagreements are unintentional. You thought this, I thought this, and then something happened. But very infrequently is it like just, duplicity is involved or like malice. But when wires get crossed, really bad things happen. Go ahead, Gary.
Well, don't you think that they might? Okay, don't you think that they will eventually have a evolutionary relationship in which there will be parameters between?
According to Rosalie's reading of it, yes. The way Rosalie read it, their relationship may grow because she's teaching him a lesson. The way Jim read it, she's not aware that anything is wrong. You could also read it another way where she's aware something's wrong and she's being, like, she doesn't care. Like, she's put, she's drawn a line, he's drawn a line, and these poor kids are going to be the bridge in the middle.
I think that Bava Ben Buta is going to follow this couple a little bit, because if he thinks that the husband sent her to break lamps over his head because that's what she thinks, then he would say there's something going on with this, and yes, they will have 2 sons, but I better watch out because those kids are going to be in trouble if these people don't start communicating properly.
Oh, good. Joette's, I never thought of this. Joette's introducing, maybe he says, you're going to have 2 kids just like me, because I realize that something's wrong and I'm going to be present in their lives because I know that I have to be an influence on them because you guys are not going to be.
So,
Yeah. Oh, and maybe he'll help them communicate.
So,
Great.
Rabbi, I think he was an early therapist.
For
a
sure.
marriage therapist. Really, I'm serious about
Yeah,
that.
yeah, yeah.
That
Yeah,
was
I
a
mean, that's
role
how
he
he's,
had.
that's, they don't use that word, obviously, but
not in
he
those
has that reputation as someone who is a helper of relationships. Yeah, a problem solver with relationships. So I thought this was a fun text to discuss. I hope you enjoyed it. I want to wish everyone a good afternoon. And if you encounter someone asks you for 2 lentils, maybe you want to ask, a clarifying question. Right, exactly. All right, have a great afternoon, everyone. Thank you.
Thank you, Rabbi.
What you were saying, right. Yeah, it's interesting. Yeah, communication. I have to run, everyone. I'm sorry because I have another thing, but have a wonderful day, everyone. Just go into the main office and they'll point you out to there. Yeah, because he's usually in there. Okay? You're welcome. Oh, thank you. Yeah.
Oh, it was a mechanic. We couldn't understand anything he said. And it's all English, but we didn't understand him.
Well, I remember one time we were in Spain. I had taken a little bit of a Spanish class, so I asked a guy for directions, and he started talking to me, and I asked him to speak a little slower. And then he said, "Oh, just follow me," and he got in his car, and we got in our car, and he led us to wherever, because he realized there was no way that we were going to be able to
What part of
figure it
Spain
out.
was that? In northern Spain or like with Basque territory?
I don't remember where we were.
But I understand. I mean, even if you speak a little Spanish.
English and Cockney.
That's right.
And I was telling, I was talking to David Gruber once, and I said I went to Scotland, and they're speaking English, and I couldn't understand a word because of the accent.
Right.
So,
It happens.
How are you?
Ernie, are you enjoying the classes? They said Hello?